Hi, this is Kristen Parasat. What I'm going to do is explain to you the mind map I made for Lecture 2. As you can see, I don't really follow any linear lines. I'm kind of all over the place. I think part of this is because this is how I saw the lecture in my head, but I'm also not the best visual learner. I tend to be kind of all over the place, and I'm more of an auditory person. So I'm going to zoom into my central image, which just shows a book, and I titled the book How to Use This Book, because I think a lot of the times as students we're bombarded with strategies of how to use a text. So in Lecture 2 we heard about oral and silent reading, and I know that there's been a lot of controversy over what really is the most important way to learn how to read, what are the differences between the two, and what do each really do for the student. Now, I teach first grade, and at our level, students really benefit more from decoding sounds out loud, and the concept of reading silently isn't something mastered by many at this point. Some of them are beginning to read silently on their own, but most tend to comprehend stories better read out loud. I'm moving down to the 1930s and 40s when basal readers came about, and this is something pretty much standard still in classrooms today: teacher guides and workbooks. Now, in our district, I teach in Bridgeton, we are using the Storytown curriculum, obviously the New Jersey edition, and for us specifically first grade. And Storytown has a separate phonics book, a generic practice book for the series, a grammar book, and a spelling workbook. So we have a ton of workbooks going on. We also have a separate writing series called Being a Writer, which I'm sure many are familiar with. And later we get into whole language versus phonics. Now, I was of the age of phonics. When I was in elementary school, we had several phonics practice books, and that was really the building blocks for me. Sounds and learning how to blend sounds together to create new words. Now, the Storytown curriculum, like I said, does have a phonics practice book on its own, and incorporated into each weekly lesson are 1, 2, 3 different digraphs the students are studying that week. Previously I taught kindergarten, so I'm pretty familiar with a lot of phonemic awareness strategies, phoneme segmentation, and really focusing on those smallest sounds that are necessary and essential to learning how to make new words. I was never really a proponent of the whole language approach. I've seen it implemented, and I really feel that kids who were instructed under the whole language approach are missing those, like I said, really essential strategies needed to decode. And again, I included a little bit of the phoneme blending, and that's what we're doing right now in Storytown specifically. We're kind of past phonemes, and right now students are working on different digraphs. We have a digraph reference chart. They're learning what sounds you can put together to create new sounds, inflections, ed, ing, inflection s, learning how to change words also to make new words. Again, focusing on roots and what those root words can be translated into. And I want to go back up to round robin and the fluency discussion. We've been discussing this in our little PLC meetings at school about fluency and having no idea what you read. Now, a lot of fluency practice might involve reader's theater and just rereading a text several times so the child is fluent in that leveled reading. A lot of times we notice that just because a child can read out loud accurately and fluently, accurately meaning the rate of errors they're making in a given text doesn't necessarily mean they're comprehending the text. And this will translate a little bit further down my map when I discuss Fountas and Pinnell and my involvement in that. Let's see. Unadulterated Phonics, the 2013 National Reading Conference, RTI, and varying levels. At the end of Lecture 2, we were asked to visit a couple of the websites, and I did visit the reading conference, and it took me right to reading recovery. I know during my student teaching several years ago, the school I was at had an RTI program, which basically was a pull-out or push-in, typically pull-out, for students who needed RTI support. If you are not familiar, and this is just general information, if you are not familiar with RTI, that's just response to intervention. I know formerly most schools just called it reading recovery. I don't really think there's too much of a difference. In our district, we kind of re-implemented response to intervention. We haven't had it for several years, and the funding just came back, I think, for 2 years. So currently we have K-4 RTI teachers and 5 to 8 RTI teachers for both language arts and math. Last year the qualifications for RTI were a little bit sketchy. This year there are 3 tiers. Tier 1 being small group classroom instruction. Tier 2 is actually pull out, push in, depending on the teacher's preferences, and basically physical space in the building. And then Tier 3, those are the students who require the most intensive remediation in reading. Right now in my classroom, I have 3 students who are receiving RTI support for reading. At the end of first grade, we're trying to get students on right around the J level, according to F&P. So mid-year, first grade, January, if a student is really reading at a D or below, they would qualify for Tier 2 instruction with the RTI teacher. And again, when they go out with the RTI teachers, we do sign documentation just so we know what skills they're working on, but they may not be the same skills we're working on in our classroom. And I just wanted to highlight the phonics point again. At this point in first grade, my Tier 1 students who are receiving instruction in the classroom may be beyond the point of simple phonemes and phoneme blending, but the RTI students who are going out may be remediating those skills as practiced in kindergarten. And a lot of times they do focus on the high frequency words for the marking period as well. And a little bit more about some of the strategies cited in Lecture 2. I know personally I was of the era of the SQ3R, before, during, after reading strategies, really drilling and learning how to read like a machine, as in reading a text and being familiar with the same before, during, and after reading strategies pretty much for every story. Right now, I've been emphasizing graphic organizers with my group. So we do a pretty standard after reading strategy to make sure students comprehend the story before taking our weekly test. Storytown always has a weekly assessment at the end of every story. Before and during, still really developmental right now in first grade. We're just trying to give them choices for how to best comprehend what they've read, and not really expanding too much on just one, mostly focusing on sequencing, retell, summarization, things like that. And into Goodman and queuing, miscues, F&P. I don't know how many other districts are using F&P. I guess in my opinion it would be pretty much standardized at this point. As I said in one of my Collect Connect quotes, students are really being pushed now to be instructed in small group leveled guided reading. We administer Fountas and Pinnell in the beginning of the year and end of the year. I know in kindergarten it is January, end of the year. In the beginning of first grade, majority of my class was reading around that D to G level. And then from there, we assigned small groups, about 5 students, no more. Gets a little difficult at that point. So I would say I had 9 groups total. And in these groups, we were building high frequency words, focusing on some word work no more than 5 minutes, and then getting into our guided reading stories. Every 4 to 6 weeks, our district is requiring a running records assessment just to see where students are moving. I have had one student who did not move up from September to January, so this tells, a little bit about how well a majority of the class is moving along. And lately, I've been attending a year-long guided reading study. In this study, we've been focusing on, what should the small group look like? I know pretty much across the board, people tend to agree, reading, literacy, students are best instructed in small groups according to, their developmental level, their readiness level. And we've been discussing in our district implementation of something that looks like a daily 5. That way students are participating in less of a traditional literacy block, more of a reader's workshop kind of view. So students would have an opportunity every day to read independently, to self, read to someone else, write independently, participate in shared writing, read aloud. So many, many elements of the reader's workshop and small groups during a literacy block. And obviously this all connects to Common Core because New Jersey has made that transition. Our Storytown and Being a Writer series have both been aligned to Common Core, although I don't see Storytown sticking around much longer. Storytown does allow for small group guided reading, but there is not the heavy emphasis on small group guided reading that you may see with a series like Journeys, which is something I know we're considering. Also, the Leads program, which is something that Violin used, I thought was really good. And I got to see more novel reading in small groups, whereas at our level we're doing, like I said, D to J right now in our groups. And again, comprehension strategies. So right now in January, a lot of this is really relevant to what we're doing because we're at that mid-year point. We're assessing, we're doing dibbles, and also taking another high-frequency assessment of students just to see where they are. Really, really interesting to me because I work with emergent readers. Last year I had the same group that I have this year, and I had the opportunity to loop with them. So I've seen them come from simple letter recognition to now having some students who are approaching that KL level.